because he believes that freedom, with our efforts, with our hard work, is inevitable. And that's what we need. So please help me give a warm hand and welcome to Mr. Adam Kokesh.
Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, I have some very, very good news to share with you today. Not what you expect to hear at a libertarian convention, is it? It's all doom and gloom, and the dollar's about to collapse, and we're all screwed, and you have to stand up and fight, or you're going to be facing a world of status pain. Well, the good news from those of us who are looking forward with the new technologies available, with the perspective of the younger generation, is that the future of liberty is not just bright, it is the destiny of humanity. And for me, I'm 31, excuse me, I'm 30. I just turned 30 for the second time. I'll be telling you that for the next 10 years at least, right? I was born in 1982 and I consider myself a member of the millennial generation. I barely legally qualify as such. But those of us who grew up with the internet, those of us who grew up with that truth button, just one click away. The entire wealth of human knowledge right there. As an assumption, not as a new thing, not as a benefit, but as an assumption. Now, like I said, I barely qualify. When I say I grew up with the internet, like literally as the internet was developing, I was growing up and learning about the world. And I think there were people who thought, wow, the internet represents a revolution in how we communicate, and how we engage in commerce, and how we handle logistics. And that was really just scratching the surface in terms of what this hive mind that is developing now represents. But before I get to the conclusions that I've come to as a result of that, I'd like to tell you, by way of explaining how I went about becoming a libertarian, how I have such faith in these conclusions, how much certainty I feel that is warranted in the conclusions that we come to as libertarians. And I'm sure you all are familiar with this. How many of you believe that being a libertarian makes your life better?
Woo!
All right, good. All right. Not everybody raised their hands, though.
We don't know what a libertarian is.
Fair enough, fair enough. Definitions excluded make it hard to answer the question. For some of you, it's awkward moments at dinner parties, estrangement from loved ones, challenges relating to the sheeple, and being a libertarian can make your life very challenging. And if that's the case, you're doing it wrong. Because coming to this message should make your life better. And for me, it wasn't a matter of just being libertarian and being right about everything. Because you got to admit, that is one of the nice benefits, isn't it?
Woo! Yeah! Yeah.
Yeah. We'll leave it at that. But for me, I was a libertarian in high school because I was a punk. Yeah. You want me to be a freaking Democrat or Republican? Screw that. No, I'm a libertarian. Yeah. Those guys. I'm one of them. That was what did it for me. Right. I just didn't want to be a Republican or Democrat, so I wanted to be a libertarian. And then I actually decided to learn what that meant. And unfortunately, there were people defining libertarianism the same way that you have, on one hand, Bill Maher, and on the other, Bill Maher, Glenn Beck, gotta use the right hands for this, who call themselves libertarians.
They're not.
Who try to define it by a set of issues. We are people who care about politics, but we're not mainstream, and we have a different set of issues that we care about. And it doesn't really cut it for me. So I eventually came to Sam Conkin's 2 definitions of libertarianism. Has anybody heard this before? There are 2 definitions of libertarian. One, anybody who calls himself libertarian. Glenn Beck, Bill Maher. And the second definition is anybody who agrees with me on everything? Any libertarians here? I didn't think so. But I came to a deeper understanding of philosophical libertarianism because, for me, being a libertarian was, sadly, when I was in high school at least, not grounded in philosophy or principle. And it didn't stop me from joining the Marines. It didn't stop me from volunteering to go to Iraq. And I was actually against the war before the war. I at least had that much damn common sense. You're like, geez, maybe this doesn't add up and it's not in America's best interest, and we're just going to preemptively, okay. I fell for the narrative, though. Then after the war, we were cleaning up our mess. I volunteered to go. One of my greatest regrets. I feel like, in a way, I was doing penance when I joined Iraq Veterans Against the War in 2007, only after I got out of the Marines. And this is really kind of embarrassing. You know how long it took me to get to the bottom of the rabbit hole of libertarianism? It's also a trick question, by the way. Because the only point at which you get to the bottom of the rabbit hole is when you realize there is no bottom. And the only time at which you reach any concept of enlightenment is when you realize that any human notion of enlightenment is impossible. But for me, when I got out of the Marines, I got busted down. I was a sergeant. I got busted down to corporal.
Whoa.
And it was for bringing a pistol back as a souvenir. And believe it or not, I'm very glad that it happened this way. Because I might have gone back to Iraq if I hadn't gotten in trouble. And I went back with the intent, get this, the reason I wanted to go back to Iraq, I didn't get a Purple Heart the first time.
Oh, no.
Isn't that sick? I mean, they really turn a switch in your brain.
Well, that wasn't exactly my word, but...
Okay. So it's a common experience. They flip a switch in your brain where the only thing that you can do, or the best that you can do to serve your country, to serve the great tribe, the collective, is to die. And I didn't want to die, but I wanted to get really close. The closer I could get and enjoy the fruits of having sacrificed, the better an American I would be. Oh my gosh. Now I've come to a certain understanding about tribalism and nationalism that a lot of libertarians even will take issue with, at least those who haven't gotten to the bottom of the rabbit hole. Has anyone else here figured out that patriotism is for bitches? And I mean that in the most direct sense. I'm not trying to curse here. I mean bitches in the tribal pack animal sense. Incapable of forming an identity for yourself, you'd rather be a beta, you'd rather be a member of the herd than form an identity for yourself. But you have to be a patriot, you have to be proud to be a member of a collective. And I hear patriots saying, oh no. My love is for the country, not for the government. Oh, so you're going to define the borders of your love by arbitrary lines drawn on a map by politicians. Okay, that makes sense. But for me, getting out of the Marines and being just disgruntled enough to start questioning things was what got me on the path of being ready to join Iraq Veterans Against the War. It was a very important experience for me when I got to Washington, D.C. after serving at Camp Pendleton. Damn it. There I go again with that status language. Serving. Thank you. Excuse me. I feel like I have to put a Bitcoin in the curse jar here. Collectivist jar. But when I joined, it was just because I saw the website. I don't even know what I was looking for. Just poking around one day. Iraq Veterans Against the War. Well, that's me. I guess I got to be a part of this. I got to have my name on this list. So I signed up and I got really involved. I was very fortunate that it really gave a new purpose to my life. I mean, going to grad school was boring in comparison to like organizing anti-war protests back when people cared about that sort of thing. Before the anti-war left revealed its true nature, as being far more partisan than principled. But I found myself surrounded by liberals. And as most of you remember, in the anti-war movement and its heydays in 2000, well, really going back to, well, the high point of the anti-war movement was actually before the war started. 2003, it was March 19, 2003, the war in Iraq kicked off. And you had over 1 million people on the mall in D.C. And after that, most people kind of gave up. And then it came back when people realized, oh, geez, this occupation thing is going to be here for a while. Maybe we should say something about that. 2006, 2007, 2008. Certainly, no one was a greater threat to the anti-war movement than our 7th, 8th part black president, ready to swoon the left and get them to shut up and get away with whatever he could possibly do on behalf of his sponsors in the military-industrial complex. And as an aside, let me just say, I went to the re-inauguration recently, and I talked to 2 young black gentlemen that were there selling commemorative inauguration passes that didn't get you into anything at all. Just nice little souvenirs. And I said, wouldn't it be something if the superclass, if the people really pulling the strings in our government decided, hey, look, if we just get a black guy to be the front man, all of the people with white liberal guilt and all of the black people in this country will shut up and stop protesting and let us get away with whatever the hell we want. Wouldn't that be ingenious? And they were like, oh shit, yeah, I think that would be pretty smart, huh? And the thing is, these guys that I talked to, I was really lucky to run into them because they were very, very upfront about this, very candid about exactly what's going on. Because they didn't dispute, like, what's this superclass thing? We live in a democracy. No, they weren't that naive. And that's what's so sad about the cognitive dissonance that you see. And I've seen that there's a lot that goes into statism. There's it's a certain pathology, if you will. If you understand its nature as coercion, we're going to come back to that. But when I was surrounded by liberals and I was like, well, I'm a libertarian, I'm right about everything. Now I just have to prove it. It really motivated me. Like and being surrounded by people that were intelligent, that were educated, that were passionate about what they were doing, that said the war in Iraq is wrong, the occupation is wrong, the people of Iraq should have the right to self-determination. Should the people of America have a right to self-determination? Can I have a right to self-determination? Can we apply these principles universally if it's wrong to infringe on the sovereignty of another nation? Isn't it just as wrong to impinge on the sovereignty of an individual in the name of democracy? And oh my gosh, it's almost embarrassing in the age of the internet that the term democracy has not become a bad word. I thought we were supposed to be about minorities in this politically correct day and age. No, we're going to go back to majority rule, and we're just going to have a system that allows the majority to create an excuse to impose its will on the minority. Sure. And this is why spreading democracy as a propaganda point actually works to, fortunately, the decreasing degree that it does. But when I was surrounded by liberals, I wanted the airtight arguments. I didn't want to be able to say, like, oh, you want socialism, I want freedom. All right, well, you have what you want over there, I'll have what I want over here, and we'll duke it out in Congress someday when we get rid of all these special interests that are in charge of this ridiculous thing. No, like, there is a logical reason for wanting to be free, and I knew it. Like, I was a libertarian, goddammit. I knew I was right about everything. I just had to prove it. And that's what motivated me to see past a future or a form of political advocacy that is just expressing a preference for how the future should be. I'd like it to be this way, therefore it should be that way, and I can force my will on others in order to make it that way. Now you might think, okay, but libertarianism is different, right? Believe it or not, libertarianism in a sense, for a lot of people, is the same way. But this led me to a study of economics. And this was in late 2008, actually. I was at the Iraq Veterans Against the War group home in DC that I'd started. And I remember seeing the bailouts on television and all the things that Bush was working on, the first round of bailouts. Everybody remembers that, TARP and the start of all that in late 2008. That was what actually really did it for me. There was a moment. I actually had a moment where I was sitting on the couch in front of the television, and everything clicked. And it was like, you know, like that moment from The Matrix when he goes, I know Kung Fu. It was like, I get economics. And it really hit me like that. And I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be by any stretch. My knowledge of economics is actually relatively shallow. But I could debate Krugman on anything if you give me the facts. Because it's a logical, rational framework. And what I realize is there are economists and there are counter-economists. There are those who study economics in order to justify various forms of central planning. That's what they do. That's what they want. The Krugmans of the world, the propagandists. Those who give the semblance of scientific analysis to people saying, well, the poor should be fed. And I don't want to really have to worry about this. I don't really want to have to do any work. I don't want to have to make any sacrifices. I just want to be able to cast a ballot and then turn my back on the problem. And then there are the counter-economists, the Austrians, who apply scientific methodology, a certain amount of logic and reason and rational analysis. And I was like, wait a second. This is what sets them apart. This is a fundamental thing. They're not all economists. There are those who are advocating for and making excuses for various forms of central planning, and there are those who are dispelling this. And the basic principles of Austrian economics, or the Austrian school, first occurred to me as like, well, okay, so we know that libertarianism is right. We already know that we're right about everything. How do we prove it? You know, how do you, when someone says, who will build the roads, how do you prove that, you know, people not pointing guns at each other will build the roads, imagine that. And it got to this fundamental concept for me, you know, and I believe in the core philosophy, what to me, the core philosophical axioms of libertarianism are, and this is, to me, the true definition. You don't have to agree with me on everything, but if you can embrace these two core concepts, we can apply them differently. We can have different thoughts and how they apply to different issues. But the basic fundamental truths that I think are starting to bring people together, I think this is what we see now in the evolution of the freedom movement. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Like decades ago, there was in the 70s, the formation of the Libertarian Party. There were various schools of libertarian thought. But especially in the age of the internet, you see as younger people are coming into the movement, the libertarian mind melt. Or it should be really the statist mind melt, or statism melts away. It's happening faster and faster. You know, and it used to be that to go from a mainstream statist, you know, fully within the matrix and bought into the entire system, to be able to shed yourself of those ideas, and for me it's really embarrassing. It took me like 15 years in a combat tour in Fallujah. I mean, holy crap. There are kids who are going through this today in a matter of months, weeks, one long weekend with friends reading Wikipedia articles and watching YouTube videos. And what they are coming to, what you see more and more, the growing wing of the broader freedom movement, is that philosophical, hardcore, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist movement, or rather segment, that is defined by these basic core principles: self-ownership and non-aggression. You as a free, beautiful, independent human being own yourself, and therefore it is morally wrong to impose your will on anybody else, or to impose on anybody else's rights of self-ownership. Now, where you go from that, you may disagree. Property rights often become an issue when dealing with people on the left, environmentalism. But of course, we know when applied consistently, these basic philosophical principles hold true. And it's great when you can, I mean, you think about this. If you were trying to debate a statist, would you rather go up with an argument that is, well, I'd like less government, I want limited government, I want government to only do this, and that's going to make things better in my view? Or do you want someone who's going to be able to say, that is fundamentally wrong and I can prove it because it is contradictory to these fundamental philosophical principles? And any time you are saying, we need government for something, you are saying, we couldn't possibly do this without force and coercion. We couldn't possibly accomplish whatever this noble goal is without pointing guns at each other. I have so much more confidence now as an advocate of liberty, speaking from that perspective rather than from the matter of preference. And the most important thing you can say when you realize the economic implications of this, that, again, the core principle is really quite simple. The foundation of capitalism. individuals interacting voluntarily, choosing to engage in an interaction, be it this speech, all of y'all choosing to sit here and keep listening to me, or an economic transaction, or a romantic relationship. You are engaging in that relationship voluntarily because you feel it benefits you. Anytime you introduce coercion into that equation, someone is doing something that is less than making them perfectly happy or as happy as they could be. To me, this is the capitalist ideal, this great human potential of if all human interactions were free of force, fraud, and coercion, this is the maximum that we could achieve for productivity that would lead to human happiness. Now, a lot of people will say, but Adam, if you want to include all these relationships in economics, you want to take a marriage or a romantic relationship and you want to see that through the lens of economics? Doesn't that cheapen things? No. Quite the opposite. It is in fact part of the scam of the economists to make you believe that those relationships don't count somehow, that they don't qualify, that if you're engaging in something that can't be put into numbers and dollars, that's somehow of lesser value. And if anything, seeing this inclusive view of economics has been liberating for me and been providing a much more comprehensive analysis of the world around us, and especially in debating statists who say they see value in these intangibles. To be able to put them in a proper moral framework that is consistent and logical and rational is actually quite liberating, believe it or not. So what makes you free? The lack of coercion in your life? I think a lot of us now are looking forward to a stateless society, seeing how that is actually, in a way, on the horizon. And if you think about it, what is that ideal? What does that stateless society represent? If there's no government, are you perfectly free? Maybe if you're free of all coercion in your own life, but think about it for a second. Let's say we abolish government, we abolish all institutions of organized coercion. The moment somebody gets drunk and punches you in the face, you're not free, sorry. You are. Not the guy getting punched. I would suppose that your will is being impeded on or impeded on by someone else's fist. Personally, I'd rather deal with the cop down the street than an angry, violent drunk in my home, but that's just because I don't do status drugs anymore. So looking forward, if you understand government as coercion, as organized coercion, and what it represents, when someone says we need government for this, we can't possibly do this without some organized system of coercion. We can't possibly figure this one out peacefully. Who will build the roads? Right? Y'all have heard that before. You're crazy. Without government, who will build the roads? And when reaching out to people, I want to help people out here, because I know that the people who would come to this conference today are advocates, are champions of this cause, who believe in this, who want to get out, and who want to be better advocates. How many of you are working on someone in your personal life that you wish would be more libertarian? Okay, most people. Good. It should be everybody. Unless you've all found the libertopian, or commune out here in Southern California that I haven't heard of, where you're libertopia, exactly. Where everybody's libertarian and you get to be surrounded by people who agree to respect your rights as a human being. But what is that? What is that objection to liberty? Like what is that? When people say no,
Fear.
I can't do it. Fear, yeah. Fear of responsibility, perhaps. But there's more to it than that. If you're someone who can at least understand the basic concept, like, hey, guess what? Persuasion is superior to coercion. Always. Mathematically speaking. What is the attachment to this self-destructive behavior of saying, no, in order to organize society somehow, we need force? And I would just suggest that, like, when I was in the Marines as a recruiter, We learn how to reach out to someone, how to sell people on this complex life decision. Like, and it is a big thing to say, I'm going to adopt this philosophy. But say, I'm going to join the Marines, that's a big deal, right? You know what recruiters do? They have these benefit tags. There's 27 of them, or at least when I was in. And they lay them out on the desk, and they say, pick your top 3. Which ones are the reasons that you are interested in getting out of the military experience? And there are different categories. There's like really practical stuff, like I'm going to learn how to blow shit up. Lots of opportunities for civilian jobs after getting out of the infantry, right? Or I'm going to get pride and belonging. I'm going to get a sense of professionalism. I'm going to get physical fitness. I'm going to get a paycheck. I'm going to get education benefits. And they don't sell you on the stuff that you don't want. They listen first. And then I worked as a counter-recruiter when I was involved with Rock Veterans Against the War. It's an important part of our work, and I think it's an important thing. And I would hope that most libertarians, thank you. The silent applause in the back there. Nick Hancock, I know, antiwar.com, represented here, yes. I would hope that anybody here who believes in freedom would not want to see anyone in their life become a part of the machine. But when I was doing that kind of work, you have to apply the same principles in reverse. Why are you joining the military? What is it that appeals to you? Well, let me tell you how the government is full of shit on that one, too. And the same principle needs to be applied to how we address statism. So when you're working on an individual, to say, what is it that attaches you to statism, and address that is going to make you a much more effective advocate, at least when you're doing outreach on a one-on-one basis. But for most people, it's a matter of information. It's a lack of knowledge. And for them, oftentimes, simply having the reassurance, like, okay, I get it, okay, persuasion, coercion, okay, makes sense. Who's going to build the roads? Well, you bring in the Austrians. You go to Mises.org, you pull up all the papers, and you go, well, here's one way. How could we have justice? And you go to Molyneux's explanation of dispute resolution organizations and all the ways that we don't have to violate people's rights as a premise of a system supposedly intended to protect your rights. Imagine that. And the internet. This is where the internet comes in. Have you noticed how the conversation has changed? Since we got the truth button now in our pockets? People don't debate facts anymore. I mean, I'm old enough now, barely, to remember I had conversations before we had smartphones. Hey, who was that actor in that movie? I don't know. What did you say? What do you think? What are those numbers about that? And yeah, what year was that? I don't know. And conversations are largely based on supposition or commonly held ideas rather than the simple fact-checking that is provided to us now. But there's something else, too. And if you understand that government is fundamentally pathological behavior, because there's no such thing as government, right? You can't point to a building and say, that's government, or that's government. Or it's not the document. But the only definition of government really is a group of people that have a socially granted monopoly on the initiation of force that nobody else enjoys. But even then, when you want to include that broad definition, in a sense it includes every voter who's sick enough to think, I'm so smart, I should be able to choose a leader for everybody else here. I should be able to, if I have the majority on my side, I should be able to impose my will on everybody else. Yes. It might be a casual thought, it might be something that people don't think about too deeply. But it is fundamentally a pathological behavior, is it not? Sure. And I look forward, and I see all the ways that we are advancing as a species. And I think really there was one thing that Marx got right. Marx got a lot of stuff right. He got a lot of stuff powerfully, dangerously wrong. But if his analysis hadn't been as correct as it had been on a number of levels, it never would have had the traction to get his bad ideas out there that it did. And one of the most powerful ideas from Marx that I think is really relevant today is this idea of the historical dialectic of how technology determines social organization. Right? We as creatures of pragmatism principles don't put food in our bellies. We've gone from tribalism to feudalism to industrialism, monarchism, socialism, communism in various forms, modern corporatist capitalism. And Marx would say that it is the technology that determines those things, those social organizations. To an important extent, I think he's very right. When we were in a primitive state, as hunter-gatherer tribes, or perhaps as hunting, roaming bands running down prey on the savannah, or whatever it is that you want to go back as your theory that you endorse of where we were as a primitive species, whoever could pick up the biggest rock was in charge. And it was in your best interest to survive and get along if you went along with that system in your little pack. Agriculture gave us feudalism, or the slave society, as Marx would describe it. Industrialism, capitalism, as he would, how do I put this gently? Misdescribe capitalism. But if you go back, there's something even more fundamental here in terms of the nature of nature and life itself. And in a way, this process of scientific and technological development that the human species is simply fortunate enough to be a part of is based on what we can go back to the very, very origin of life. How many of you have seen those videos, right, where they have the first protein forming in the primordial soup, and then you see them like coming together as now you have these clumps of proteins that are working together, and these little energy spirals are coming together, and then you see them forming the precursors to single-celled organisms, and then you have single-celled organisms. And then you have multi-celled organisms. And the multi-celled organisms, what do? They eat the single-celled organisms. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Cooperation, superior to coercive division. The more synergy, the more life. And you come to where we are today as multi-celled organisms coming together. This seems to be the nature of energy, of entropy in the universe. And I have my thoughts about where this goes and how the universe collapses back into itself as a result of humanity 3D printing rocket ships in our backyards and taking over the universe, right? But think about where we are right now. In that great experience of human life. Everything that has happened over the last 2 million years that got us from that state of nature to where we are today, that difference. You can imagine this. We are very fortunate to be living at a point in time where we can look back to the origin of the species and see how radically different life is today. And by the way, for all the all the doomsday prophets out there, for all those who would say that we are experiencing the worst tyranny possible, when you understand what real freedom is, you have to realize that's not true. For all the wars, for all the exponential Federal Reserve spending, for the growth of government, do you know that today as a human being you are living at a time when you as an individual are least likely to experience force actually exercised against you? And if you look at those fundamental dynamics, you look at the exponential growth curve of society, you look at all of these fundamental things that define the human experience now. What we're about to experience in the next 100 years, maybe 200 years, is going to be as radical as the last 2 million years. And the good news is most of us are going to be around to see this. How many of you are familiar with the work of Aubrey de Grey? At least, okay, with one hand. What he describes we are coming to is longevity escape velocity. Human life expectancy is increasing not on a linear curve, but on an exponential curve because it's determined by technology. And at some point, we're going to get to the point where human life expectancy is increasing faster than time is passing. Think about that for a second. It means nobody dies of old age anymore. Crazy. But this is right around the corner. The technological singularities. Everybody's familiar with this concept, right? We're going to have computers that are smarter than us. If we haven't, by some definitions, crossed that threshold already.
AI.
And now, just as an aside here, oftentimes people say, but Adam, look at how dumb the average American is. Look at literacy rates in New York. Holy crap, we just heard last week 80% of high school graduates in New York City can't functionally read enough to go to college. Wow. But when you go, well, in Thomas Jefferson's day, everybody could read and speak 5 languages and knew the encyclopedia front to back, and oh yeah?
Not true.
Look at this. Now, which would you rather have? Who is smarter? A 5th grader today with one of these or Thomas Jefferson? All right. For certain things, I know you're going to go with Jefferson, but I think that's one right? Can you tell me what the economy is going to look like in 30 years?
No.
Not if you can't tell me when your friend has a computer in his brain that's smarter than you and a 3D printer in his living room or in his pocket that can create anything he wants when he thinks of it. What do you get that guy for Christmas? You have no idea what the economy is going to look like. And I'm talking, I mean, it's really hard to imagine this now with the technological singularity. I mean, does anybody know what the current estimates are for when we're going to cross that threshold?
2025?
2025? That's 12 years. Damn, really? It's down to 12 years now? 12 years.
Getting old.
And you know what? It's really kind of a silly, arbitrary benchmark. I think the scientists who came up with that term were rather quite arrogant when they said, this is the point at which computers are this is when the technology is important, when it's smarter than us. Because human evolution, because biological evolution got the human brain to this smart, when the technology passes this little arbitrary benchmark right here, that's when things are going to take off? Really? Computing power, technological innovation, productivity, life expectancy. Not linear, exponential curves. Now, just as an aside, while you've got that image in your mind, how many of you think the dollar's about to collapse? All right, about 2/3, 3/4 of the room. I have some bad news for you. It might not. Might be good news. And I can prove this mathematically, really simply. Because a lot of people go, look, no, Adam, it's mathematical. They're printing exponentially. It gets bigger and bigger. Collapse is inevitable. No, it's not. Do you understand the rip-off that the Fed represents, that fiat currencies represent, that is a skimming off the top of economic productivity? Here we understand human nature becomes relevant. Because while all these curves are increasing exponentially, for the average human being, if they just get a slightly better life than their parents' generation, they'll be happy. The rip-off can continue exponentially because productivity increases exponentially as long as they let quality of life for the average human being continue to go up. It could go on forever. The collapse itself is not mathematically inevitable. Now we're talking about the results of decisions of what we know to be a relatively few men behind closed doors. So the dollar could collapse, but already we see competing currencies in local currencies, the Bitcoin, in ways that people are trading gold and silver, in many ways supplanting the dollar because people are simply recognizing the rip-off that it represents. How much thought do you think the average American put into whether or not they should use the dollar? Not very much. And it's really mind-boggling to think, like, how they've gotten away with this. I remember for me as a kid, I had comic books. It costs about $2.50, $3 to buy a comic book. I used to say, and even, yeah, you go, wow. Because the good ones, I'll say 5 cents on the cover. Mom, Dad, what's going on here? And even as I was a kid, from like when I was 8 to when I was 15, one of the reasons I like got out of comic books was like, they're getting kind of expensive.
Yeah.
And everybody asks their parents at some point, right? Mommy, Daddy, where does money come from? Okay, maybe not like that, but what is inflation? And what's the answer? Go ask somebody else. I don't know. It's a fact of life. Inflation just happens. And people accept it because we're creatures of pragmatism first. But I believe that technology is fundamentally empowering. And everybody's going to be a libertarian eventually, whether they like it or not. You can take comfort in that. But do you see where this is going? Now you can tell me, okay, exponential growth curves never go vertical, right? But as far as our pea-sized brains can consider the reality around us, what we are coming to, really, within the next 50 years, I can only describe as the asymptote of human existence. Like right now, I could look up on the internet and I could tell you where the fastest computer in the world is. I don't know.
China.
China? Yeah, probably. And I'd like to borrow a phrase from the Chinese, which is appropriate since they're going to own this country soon. May you be blessed to live in interesting times. And we are living in interesting times indeed. But what happens when we get to the point where we don't even know where the smartest computer in the world is because the computers are making the next smarter computers for us? Do you see where this is going? Am I painting enough of a picture here for you? How radically different will society be when we, and you might be recalcitrant about certain aspects of transhumanism. We saw the computer that used to take $1 billion to house get small enough to go in our pockets, and now it's on Google Glass. The head-mounted iPhone is just around the corner too. But what happens when we're 3D printing new bodies for ourselves? How radically different is society at that point? And this is where Marx got it wrong. Because he imposed his future vision on the world then and said, that's when it's going to be communism. That's when we're going to have this revolution. And it was contrary to all of his other predictions. All of his other analyses when he said, no, technology determines this. And then all of a sudden, human desire is going to pick a certain societal organization, and we're going to have a revolution, and that's going to be it. Well, the same way that the prophets of the dollar collapse have it wrong. I feel like as a younger libertarian, I know there's some younger libertarians in the room here, Nick, especially there. How old are you, Nick?
27.
27. What?
Yeah.
You're only 4 years younger than me? Are you? Who is anybody here younger than that? Yeah, right. Okay. Personal guests excluded. I feel like we've been hearing for decades, the dollar's about to collapse, the dollar's about to collapse. And it hasn't. And I think there's a new awareness forming among the libertarian movement, among people that are truth seekers, that are thinking about the world this way. That it's not a revolutionary process. It's an evolutionary process. And coming to look at the world this way is very empowering. And it's very, not just empowering, but it's almost a relief. The false prophets of the dollar collapse will tell you if you don't buy your gold and silver from me, you're wrong. By the way, I'm in the business now with my sponsorship of selling gold and silver, shameless plug, agoristmetals.com. But I won't tell you that the dollar's about to collapse, because the most important thing we can see looking forward is I don't know. So what are the implications of this? The first one that is the most liberating is you don't have to fight for liberty. You don't have a moral obligation. You don't have a duty to future generations. You don't have something that makes you want to look down on the poor sheeple that haven't come to realize this perspective yet. And it really is liberating the way you relate to the world, the way you relate to people around you, the way you relate to society, the way you relate to all of these pathologically sick people, statists. But would you call someone in a tribe or in a pack 2 million years ago sick because they were willing to go along with the coercion of the guy who could pick up the biggest rock? You get to do these things. It is a privilege. It is an opportunity. It is a gift that you get to be a part of the evolution of humanity. And I don't know a better way to do it than as a libertarian activist myself. But the implication of this is that everything we are doing right now is making government obsolete. We see this in a new strain of libertarian activism. People who are forming community safety organizations, who are creating agorist businesses based on complete evasion of the state, supplanting the things that government does with things that completely replace it. And I'm absolutely confident, from what to me is this rational analysis, this way of looking at the trajectory of society, that there is not going to be a libertarian revolution. It's an evolution. It is the obsolescence of government, because by the force of nature, persuasion is superior to coercion. Cooperation is what moves life forward. So for all of the pathological statists out there, we get to be guiding lights. As Murray Rothbard said, remaining ignorant of economics is no crime, since it is, after all, referred to as the dismal science. But to loudly proclaim an opinion while remaining in a state of ignorance is another thing altogether. And when you get to look at the world this way, when you get to see how humanity is moving forward, not only do you get to live free now, free yourself of the struggle, free yourself of the fight, but you get to also live with the comfort that the future of liberty is not just a bright one, it is the destiny of humanity. Thank you very much.